Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So today we have the great invited speaker that I'm delighted to introduce to you. So Orhan Fırat is a research scientist at Google Research, working on the sequence modeling problems and applications to machine translation. So he has so far published many papers in top-tier conferences such as the ACL, MNOP, NeurIPS, AAAI, and so on. And I'd like to stress, so he's one of the pioneers on the multilingual neural-machine translation areas. At last, so he recently built the massively multilingual massive MT called M4, like handling the 103 languages, which is super exciting. And so all of us welcome you, Orhan. Thanks.
Thanks for the warm and generous introduction, and thanks for coming in. It's great to be back here. So I was here 3 years ago. I gave another talk with the title Explorations on Multilingual Machine Translation.
It was 3 years ago.
It was 3 years ago, I think.
2016.
16, yeah. Okay. And the title was, but I remember title because I checked the slides. Explorations on multilingual machine translation. So over the last 3 years, we've been trying to add 2 more massive. So that's the short story. But that talk also was given with an author, like with a 3-author list. Now we have 30 authors or collaborators spanning so many teams at Google. Research, Translate, TensorFlow. You'll see problems that is at scale, and sometimes it's a systems problem, sometimes it's a theoretical problem, sometimes it's a neural network problem, sometimes it's a machine translation problem. So this is a very multifaceted problem that I'm very excited to talk about. And so I'm happy to be part of the team and the project. So there are two massive that we added over the last 3 years. The first massive is about the number of languages that we add within a single model. It's about basically we're trying to extend the coverage of a common machine translation model, which is used to translate from one source language into one target language. If you can think of like machine translation matrix or LWMT matrix, basically we're trying to cover the all cells in that matrix and increasing our coverage from 1 to 100 as the first phase. I'll talk about what is our next phase and so on. That's where we head to universal translation. And the second M is about the massiveness of the neural networks. So over the last couple of years, it's actually more than 3 years, we are seeing a trend. It's almost a sure shot if you increase the capacity of your neural network, and if you're successful if you're successful at training the neural network, success seems almost guaranteed. So there are a lot of criticism about, is this really a neural art? Where's the science in it? Where's the research question? But it seems like that trend is holding. And the second massiveness of the entire project is basically trying to scale the neural networks by using this trend or by trying to understand what is happening in this trend. So it's, as we called our project, massively multilingual, massive machine translation. It's a bit of a mouthful, but if you say M4, I think it feels a little bit more okay. All right, and this is not working. Okay, I'll go here. That's not also working. Okay, I'll just go over what is our goal motivations. I'll describe how are we attacking this problem, and I'll try to end with some open problems. So our entire goal, our end goal, is trying to build a universal translation model. So this is a goal that's like a holy grail in connectionist sequence modeling or connectionist paradigm. Since 1950s, we're trying to parameterize the interlingua or trying to parameterize the intermediate medium between languages or sequences or communication. And universal translation is the actualization of it. How do we define universal translation? It's basically building a single model for all the languages out there and being able to translate between any of these source languages to any of these target languages. So we believe it's the holy grail of neural machine translation, and whole effort here that you're going to be seeing, it's a step forward towards that direction. just as a summary, we also summarized our recent progress in a Google AI blog post. It's pretty much what I'm going to be talking about here in my talk. So you can find some references and so on in that blog post as well. So what is the problem that we're solving? What is our motivation? I'll be using here. I hope I'm not going to block anyone. Maybe I'll use here. Okay. So our first motivation is the improving translation quality, but increasing translation quality across the board, not particularly for one language, but for all languages. So this is the data set that we're using. It's a curated data set. It's a crawled data set from the web, and we kept it around 25 billion examples. And it's covering 103 languages that Google Translate is supporting. I learned that our 103 is an arbitrary number, but that's all the language that we try to keep the number of languages at some point. So we decided 103, and let's use all the data that's available for all these 103 languages. If you look at on the left-hand side of this plot, you see high-resource languages, and on the right you see low-resource languages. For high-resource languages, you see the number of examples is actually over billions. It's of course noisy, but it's a lot. And as you go, this is a log scale, by the way. And as you go towards the low resource end, you'll see the example number of available training examples drops dramatically. And on the left-hand side, we can, by training giant models, like throwing all the tricks that we have, we can actually approach human quality. And you can also see that if you have more than 100 million examples, you can throw so many tricks, you can narrow down the domain, etc. You can actually reach almost human quality there. But that's not the case for low-resource languages. If the number of examples is less than, say, 1 million, it of course depends on the difficulty of the language, etc., etc. But it's a general trend that you see low resource. If you have really small amounts of data, you're not that good in the translation quality. On high resource, you're actually doing quite good as a community. But our goal is to try to improve everything across the board. And in multilingual NMT, it's basically a transfer mechanism. It's a positive language transfer you can also think of. It's basically what happens if you train a multilingual model. You observe a transfer from these high resource languages towards the low resource languages. This is known as positive language transfer or positive transfer in machine learning. So high resource data or high resource languages or tasks are going to help the lower resourced or easier tasks. But okay, so we got this covered. Low resource languages, we're going to do good. But what are we going to do on the high resource languages if our goal is to build a universal translation system? So that's the first low resource languages, improving low resource. It's coming from the massively multilingual part of the entire project. And improving the high resource is coming from the massiveness of the neural networks. So this is a two-pronged attack. It's massively multilingual to improve mid to low resource languages. It's also the other branch is basically scaling up your neural networks to the capacity limits to increase the quality of high resource languages. The other thing is, we kept it at 103 languages, but 103 is not the total number of languages in the world. Here I throw some numbers from what Google Translate right now supports. There are 7,000 plus languages. Google only supports 103. 2,000 African languages. Google Translate only supports 11. And 100 plus Native American languages. Google supports 0. So actually, we really need to build a universal translation model as soon as possible, because by the end of this century, half of these languages are going to be gone. So it's also our kind of a duty as a research community. The third interesting thing is about the recent trend that I talked previously. This is about neural network scaling and our new understanding of generalization. I don't know the audience, the background of the audience, but please let me know. I can go into the detail. But let's first talk about the amount of data with the error that we get, the generalization error. How do they interact with each other? So if you're also interested, you can take a look at the details here in this paper. But let's assume there are three regions in the current paradigm. The first region is the small data region. It's basically you're at the best guess error. You're basically at chance level. Or you can think of it even smaller than IWSLT, you're not even able to reduce increase the BLEU score, or you're not getting anything rather than memorizing everything. The second, so in this region, you should gather more data, right? But what about the second region? This is the power law region. As you scale, as you get more training data, you're actually gonna reduce the generalization error. So this is we believe this is the region that we are at now as the research community. But also we're gonna hit the wall at this irreducible error region. So even if we get more data, we're not gonna be seeing anything better. This is because of not being able to scale the models up. This is more about the sampling error of the training set. So data generating distribution is noisy, so you cannot reduce the generalization error even further. So if you're here, what should we do? It's actually a very simple recipe, and it actually explains what's happening over the last couple of years. We just search for a model and then problem fit. Okay, this model seems good for this problem, and then we scale. And then it literally improves the generalization error. So this is one trend. It's on the amount of data. How does it correlate with the generalization error? Which ties back to the number of examples that I just mentioned. We were using 25 billion examples, so we believe we have a long way to go if we actually scale the model sizes up. The other trend is about why does generalization error decrease, or why am I generalizing as I increase the model capacity? So this is kind of counterintuitive if you think about the statistical learning theory. It suggests that as you increase as the approximation error decreases, your estimation error will increase. So this is what we know in the statistical learning theory. But recent trend in neural networks, it suggests as you decrease your approximation error, your generalization error will also get better. So this is a mind-blowing finding, and a lot of people are working on it right now. It's tightly coupled with the optimization, which we call training error. I'm not going to be going into details, but if there's interest, I'll be happy to talk after or in the last couple of minutes. So that's the motivation why we are actually scaling neural networks, and we're expecting some gain. And these gains are actually targeted to generalization, not memorization. So another motivation is this is a really compelling testbed. It's you could guess from the author list there are 30-something authors, 30-something participants. It's a testament of how compelling of a testbed is this problem. If you think about the massively multilingual part, we just talked about, okay, you built the system, but how are you building the system? It's a big problem, mostly studied in the multitask learning framework. And current approaches or current solutions to multitask learning problems are mostly studied under meta-learning or continual learning paradigms. I will talk about what these entail and what are the future directions that we can take at the end. But that's the first part. That's the interesting research problems lying there. The second interesting research problem is about the massiveness of these approaches of the project. So to achieve this massive multilinguality, you need to also scale up the model capacity, and vice versa. As you scale the model capacity, you need more data. Where this data is going to be coming from? Only one language? It's probably not, because you will have some other problems. So you have to increase your coverage to enrich your data, but also increase the number of samples in your training set. If you remember the log scale and generalization error plot. So increasing the model capacity is not easy. There are so many options. It's a very large search space, and there is no single way of doing it. Depending on the architecture, depending on the problem, things change. But there is also another dilemma, trainability and expressivity dilemma. It's basically the second bullet, trainability and optimization. Just because you scale your neural networks to trillion parameters, it doesn't mean that you will be able to fit on the data, or you'll be able to make that model converge. So there's a huge problem going on there. It's an active research problem right now in the field. And also, if you train a trillion weights parameter to trillion parameter network, will you be able to analyze? Will you be able to optimize? Will you be able to serve at the end? These are open questions. So there are a lot of efficiency improvements. If you can think of network pruning, lottery ticket hypothesis, they all fall into the third bullet here. So it's a very compelling testbed for machine learning research in general. So how did we actually partition this project? How did we make progress over the last 3 years. So we, of course, probed 3 different directions first. Probably not you think, probably on the contrary what you think of, but we first probed the depth or scaling up the neural networks, because that was the crucial thing and that was the key. So that's why we first analyzed how we can train very deep neural networks without even having, say, debugging routines or debugging practices at hand. So the main problem right now in deep learning or neural network research or across the family of models, the problem is, if you're going to plot something to understand what's going on in a model, which dimensions, what should be the x-axis of the plot and y-axis of the plot. So that's crucial. You should probably find out what should I plot to understand what is going on. It's not only about, okay, log perplexity is decreasing, or my BLEU score is increasing. How can I interpret what is going on in this model by using these 2? So we actually devised a couple of monitors or debugging tools, and then we managed to scale neural networks, neural machine translation models, fairly good amounts, fairly good depths and number of parameters in that paper. Second, we control, by the way, every time that we're attacking we're approaching one particular branch, we were fixing everything else. For example, in the first one, we're not analyzing multilinguality. Everything is controlled, data set size, amounts, and everything is controlled. And the second one, we control now everything about the depth, scale, and other things, other factors. We just focused on, okay, how many languages we can cram into a single neural machine translation model. So there we answered that question, and our answer was we can actually, if we kept the amounts of data to 100 for all, 1 million for all 103 languages, it's basically a capped version of this plot. So we're capping it here. So we're using 1 million examples for all languages. It's actually getting rid of all these trainability issues and so on, or multitasking issues. With that, we were able to cram 103 languages within a single model. But these 2 combined, if you want to combine these 2, if you relax some of the assumptions that you have, they come with a lot of trainability challenges. Think about the data distribution here. Again, sorry about that. I'm jumping back and forth. Think about the training process of this, using all this data. And then you made one epoch over the whole entire set, and you're using SGD. You're basically subsampling examples within this bucket, within this within this mixed bag. What ends up happening? You're going to be oversampling high resource languages a lot. You're not going to be touching any of the low resource languages. So at the end of you think that you made one epoch over this data set. Because of the stochasticity, what you end up seeing is you overfit on low resource languages and you have a long way to go for the high resource languages. Or you haven't seen any examples on the low resource languages, and your model is favoring high resource languages. So there's a trade-off that you should be actually balancing out. That's what we studied in the last paper. I will talk about the details of this shortly. But these 3 directions combined, we call this, okay, each one of these directions are promising directions, and we can control things and make progress. And then we decided, okay, let's call it M4. After the pilot studies, we moved to a realistic scenario, removing all the constraints that we have. Use 103 languages, scale your neural networks to the chip limits or the hardware limits, and also do not restrict the constrained number of examples per language. So this is literally M4 in the wild. No rules, no nothing, no constraints. That was our setup. We put one paper about the M4 in the wild. That was more our position paper that we were outlining what are the problems in the field in this direction or in this realm. And we followed that position paper with a couple of papers, which I'm going to be talking about now, addressing each one of these open problems that we laid out in the open problems paper. But first, we had to develop some baselines, and we wanted to be careful because it's going to be using a lot of resources, compute, and headcount and manpower, basically. So we did some. So I'm going to be talking about how we set our baselines. and how did we learn given this data imbalance. And then at last, I'll talk about how we increase the model capacity. Our goal in this phase was, okay, train 103 language translation model and attain parity with your baselines. Basically, beat your baselines on all these 103 languages with a single model. So I also catch cold last week. Sorry about my voice. So let's look at the data distribution again, where we overlay the bilingual baseline BLEU scores on top. So here BLEU scores, these BLEU scores don't overread it. These are just held out set that we believe it's a good proxy for generalization, but it actually reflects the high resource, low resource quality issues. So in the high resource languages, we're reaching good 40-something quality BLEU score. On the low resource, actually the BLEU score drops quickly. This is also the case for perplexity, or how well are you fitting on the data. But I just showed here the BLEU scores. So now let's collapse these, over the next couple of plots, I will be collapsing this 102 bilingual baselines into the zero line. And then I will be only showing negative and positive BLEU scores to make it easy to digest. So what about the model? Model is actually not super fancy. It's a slightly different wiring of transformer BIC. It's a bigger than transformer BIC, our baselines. But they're basically using two tricks coming from these two papers. It has different normalization scheme. It also has very deep models. It has some transparent attention, which is basically weighted skip connections to the encoder. But in terms of the architecture itself, the sharing paradigm or sharing scheme, it's extremely important for multitask models. And I just sketched the history on the multitask models or multilingual models, NMT models. So what you can share and what you cannot share. Basically, that's the spectrum here. So you can share a fixed length representation across all the source and target languages, but that creates a huge bottleneck. So you have to basically cram the meaning into a single vector here and decode from that. Or you can share some submodules which naturally emerged as attention module in an RNN-based sequence-to-sequence models. And you can actually share a single attention network across multiple encoders and multiple decoders, but it increases the number of encoders and decoders linearly as you add more languages. And the third case is you basically share everything, including word embeddings, whatever you can think of. You can share everything. That's basically the Google multilingual NMT system. And actually, because of the simplicity and in order to reduce the search space, to narrow down the search space, we go with the last one here. And how you guide the language that you want to translate into, you either prepend a token or you just learn an embedding for that language and then add that embedding while you decode, either on the encoder or decoder side. Okay, this is our initial baseline. As I mentioned, we collapsed the bilingual baselines into zero line here. So zero line, there are actually 103 languages here. Since our data set, one thing I forgot to mention, our data set is mostly English-centric. So examples are, for example, Spanish to English and English to Spanish. So when you train using all this data, you end up with a multilingual model that is English-centric. And you can easily evaluate in an English-centric fashion. And on all my slides, you'll be seeing on the left English to any of these languages. And on the right-hand side, you'll always be seeing any to English translation pairs, translation directions. So what it means, these two plots are coming from the same model, but we evaluated either on English to any of the languages in the 103 mix, or any of the 103 mix to English. You can also evaluate basically off-diagonal cells in this matrix. Sometimes they're zero shot, or they're called zero resource, but I'm not going to be talking about that here. But if you just picked up the data, you pick up data, don't scale anything, but just train a comparable baseline, a comparable model with your baseline using all the data, this is what you see. Let's look at the English to any. So it's basically only on a few languages you see this trend line. Blue trend line is coming from a single model using the original data distribution. it's actually quite bad. It's only beating high resource languages for some languages, but other from those couple of languages, it's actually below the bilingual baselines on all the languages that you consider. And the story is the same when you're translating into English as well. So in the multilingual models, we were expecting to get a great, amazing English language model because it's the target side. The model is seeing so many English examples, but it's not the case. So what is going on? It's because that you're using original data distribution. So if you just change the original data distribution with some smarter sampling strategy, it doesn't even actually have to be smarter, just some simple heuristic you can use. For example, Multilingual BERT is using some simple temperature-based heuristics. Old multilingual models, they were using some simple heuristics, some temperature-based, some smoothing out. We actually employed those techniques, and you can get quite some improvements on the lower source languages. So that's plotted with the red curve here, green curve here. So if you see high resource languages are still regressing, they're still behind compared to the bilingual baselines, but you start to see the gains of multilinguality, which emerges as a boost in the quality of low resource languages. This is especially the case when you're translating into English, because now you're training a more balanced English language model, and you start to see the gain for all the low resource languages. Here you see up to 10 BLEU score improvement for low resource languages when you're translating from any of these languages into English. So that checked one of our goals. Okay, we can improve low resource quality. But why is it this bad? Why is it not really getting close to the bilingual baselines? So it's because of you're cramming so many tasks. You're basically asking the single model with a fixed amount of capacity to do so many things at the same time. So it is hard. So what we're here controlling, okay, let's gradually reduce the number of languages that we consider in a multilingual model down to 10 within intervals of 25, like 50. We drop it to 50, drop it to 25, drop it to 10, and then see as expected, as you remove number of languages in the whole mix, the per language capacity increases, so you get close to your bilingual baseline. And in this case, your upper bound of capacity is kept by the bilingual baselines. So this is just to test, is there something else going on or not? So we validated, okay, this is just a capacity issue. So then what happens if we train an individual model? So we control the number of languages, but we didn't control, okay, there seems to be different trends happening when I'm translating into any or when I'm translating into English. So what is happening? Is it also related with the task interference? So that's why we trained isolate individual models. We picked one model. We trained one model only from English to any of these languages. So this is coming from a single model. This is coming from another different model. So here we see when we individually train two models, when we're training English to any, it's not actually any better than our massively multilingual, say multi-way model. So this indicates there's a massive interference problem going on. So all the tasks are interfering with each other, or there are some other problems happening, say, during the search process maybe. Maybe we're not guiding our search process and literally beam search properly. It's at every step, it's basically solving a harder and harder problem at every step. So there is research needs to be done here. Okay, and what about on the right-hand side? This is literally a capacity problem, and then interference doesn't seem to be affecting this direction as expected. So as you drop half of the tasks, as you drop English to any of the tasks, you see a delta improvement across the board. So it's also indicating us, okay, for the future direction, we can just either remove some of the tasks, or we can increase the model capacity to attack this direction of translations. So at that point, scaling seemed to be a sure shot. But it's also a research question: how are you going to scale? So there are so many variables that you can play with. And they also interact, since this is a multitask problem, or you're learning so many things all at once, different hyperparameters have different effects of either generalization or memorization of the giant network. So the first question that we did ask was, should we go deep or wide? Which one transfers better, or which one generalizes better? That was the first question that we asked. The first two actually the same. Sorry about that. And we also answered, okay, what we can do about the task interference when we're translating from English to any. So those are the questions that we're trying to answer. So the first one is scaling up the model capacity. So if you're familiar with transformer big, I mentioned our baselines are slightly bigger than transformer big. So they have around 400 million parameters. It's not the case for all languages. For low resource languages, we're playing with some of the hyperparameters to actually regularize the model and then fit to get better generalization. But in general, here you see our previous model in the light blue. This is the 400 million transformer multilingual model compared against the bilingual baselines. It's the y-axis. And we trained, this was a controlled study. We did, okay, let's limit the number of parameters in the network and then scale it in two axes. These two axes were width or depth with a parameter budget of 1.3 billion. So I'll give you 1.3 billion parameter, just scale it as you wish. And which one is doing better, which one is doing worse, and how is the transfer characteristics of these two regimes. Interestingly, but also supporting the literature, deeper models transfer better. Very deeper model here you see is the dark blue curve. It's doing as good as the wide model on high resource languages, but it's actually transferring way better to the low resource languages. So if we can actually say transfer is an indicator of generalization, then we can say deeper models generalize better. That aligns very well with the current understanding of deep networks. What wide models are doing, wide models are spending their capacity mostly on memorizing things. So if you memorize too much, then it's hard for you to generalize as good as your deeper counterparts. So if you have a 1.3 billion parameter budget, and if you're solving multiple tasks at once, it's better to go deeper than going wider. But what is the limit? Okay, if you go deeper, it gets better. So how can we push the limit of it? So how we can actually even go beyond 1.3 billion just by increasing the depth. So that's what we actually hit the hardware limit. We hit at that point the systems limit. So we had to stop and develop the systems or the tools to scale even beyond 1.3 billion. So we took a pause. We developed GPipe. It's a pipeline parallelism framework that allows you to train very big networks, which I'll be talking shortly. But by using GPipe, we trained 128 layer transformers, and it was actually getting better and better. Of course, for some low resource languages, the quality was saturating already. But on the high resource languages, without losing anything on the transfer capability, the models was actually getting better and better as we make these models deeper. Okay, but that is one axis, one dimension of scaling things up. How we can also exploit the multitask nature of this problem. So there are different architectures or different wirings that you can play with to increase the model capacity dramatically. And we chose mixture of experts. You can think of mixture of experts as a learned ensembling, but everything is happening inside the model. So you have multiple experts within the model, and you have some routing mechanism, and then you have some gather. You basically distribute and gather, and then you learn how to weight individual experts, and then you basically come up with a implicit ensembles. And each of these experts you can play with its capacity to inflate your model parameters. And by using by using mixture of experts, what we did, this mixture of experts, the particular implementation that we used was sparsely gated mixture of experts. I put the paper link in a couple of, I think paper link is here. If you're interested, take a look at the paper. But the implementation of mixture of experts in the transformer, it's not trivial. How do we do it? So transformer consists of consecutive transformer layers. Each layer consists of self-attention and a feed-forward network. Here, how we implemented mixture of experts, we replaced every other feed-forward layer with a mixture of expert layer. So here you see, for example, this is the mixture of expert layer sitting on top of the multi-head attention. This is the original feed-forward. So this is the original transformer layer. This is a mixture of expert transformer layer. And we implemented mixture of experts at token level. So in the forward pass, each token is actually routed to k number of experts. And by increasing the number of experts here to the extreme, say, for example, 512 experts, you can scale the model, you scale the number of parameters in your model to be beyond 10 billion or 100 billion.
Can you say more about the mixture of expert implementation here? Is replacing the feed-forward layer?
Yes. So we are replacing feed-forward layer here. Here there's a feed-forward layer. We're just replacing it with a mixture of expert layers. Each expert is a transformer feed-forward layer, but it has a different combination, and it has a different routing and combination subroutine where you sandwich a feed-forward layer with those. And there's also a dispatch happening at the end of the multi-head attention. It's looking at all these tokens, and then, okay, it's saying these tokens should go to that expert, these tokens should go to the other expert. We also sacrifice some of the quality gains for efficiency. Probably it's better if you route the entire language or entire sentence, you can devise language-specific experts. But if you implemented at token level experts, they have high throughput, high device utilization, and they also increase the model capacity dramatically.
And the gating for those mixtures coming from token level?
Gates are tiny networks. The value of those gates are learned. Those are tiny networks, and they're also looking at the token level. Yes, yeah. I will talk about a specific case of mixture of experts at the end, where the conditioning is on the language index. We can also look at the language ID and then route individual tokens. By doing so, we first scaled up to 10 billion parameters and then scaled to 50 billion parameters. With an interesting, so here, by the way, I'm only showing to English, all languages to English, because English to any other language, it's still an open problem that I'm going to be touching at the end. So if you're willing to contribute on that direction, that's a very promising direction for research.
So effectively, it is 50 billion parameters, but you don't have 50 billion trainable parameters.
You have 50 billion tunable parameters.
But the mixture of experts is giving you that.
Yes, yeah, but at every step you might be tuning different experts. There is also additional cost term, which I didn't put the details, which is ensuring the balance across each expert. So it's trying to maintain a uniform balance across each expert to utilize all the experts, basically all the parameters that you put in. By doing so, as you see, 10 million, if you just train a model with 10 billion parameters, mixture of experts, you're already better than all your bilingual baselines. So the second goal check. But why are we stopping at 10 billion? We can also scale it even further. This is 50 billion. We wanted to see where is the upper bound, where should we hit, where we should stop. Because we want to also understand which part of the data regime that we are at. Are we in the irreducible error region? What does it say about the transfer and so on? So it's not only about improving the quality, it's also a research endeavor that we will really want to get the answer. So that was the purpose of scaling the models even beyond. But here you see lower source transfer. Since these are a mixture of experts, they can specialize on high resource languages. And if you specialize too much on high resource languages, then the transfer is happening less and less. So actually, as you scale beyond some parameter limit, you're not seeing that much transfer happening to the low resource compared to the others, of course. So you can also, what you can do, you can drop half of the tasks to keep the upper bound, to basically set the upper bound. You can drop half of the tasks which was basically English to any. You can drop all those tasks and you can train a single model from any to English, and it sets your upper bound in terms of number of parameters. Here we just plotted what happens if this dark green is our quality upper bound with 50 billion parameters. And the improvements here, I don't trust too much on blue. I wouldn't read too much into it. But the improvements are, even on high resource languages, they start from 5 blue score. So this is a huge improvement if you believe in blue and if you read in blue. But how we optimize, we usually look at the perplexity. How well are we fitting on the data? And you see the same plot, which I'll be showing shortly, in the perplexity or on the loss that you train your models on. Okay, which one is better, deeper models or mixture of experts? If I actually limit the capacity between these two, if I control the number of parameters between these two, which one is going to get me more gains, or what can I learn from these two? So here we try to control number of parameters or the throughput. Here, green, you see again mixture of experts which has 10 billion parameters, and transformers, which is very deep, 6 billion parameters transformer deep. This has 256 layers. And here the quality gain, it's actually supporting what I've said earlier. Deeper models transfer better. In the case of mixture of experts, they bring you huge device utilization. So we believe the future is going to be, again, best of the both worlds. So we are at the process of mixing these two together. The final results, this is the final result, the summary of everything that I said. But let's look at the scale of things. Let's take a sidestep and ask ourselves, what the heck are we doing? What is this madness of scaling neural networks capacity? So this is another endeavor towards, in terms of number of synapses, in order to reach the human, the numbers that humans have. And it's arguable you can correlate intelligence with number of synapses or connections in the brain, excluding cerebellum. And let's assume it's the case, and let's look at where we are right now as a community. So this is an MT with attention. It had approximately 25 to 50 million parameters. And the transformer came, it had around 400 million parameters. It was a revolutionary architecture, but it was even worse than a honeybee in terms of number of synapses. And the recent advances over the last year, these are the models that we're seeing. Google T5, it's using 11 billion parameters. NVIDIA Megatron is also 8 billion parameters. Microsoft Zero, it's I think 1.5 billion. OpenAI GPT-2, 1 point something. And ResNet-X, they all actually, we're not even there to reach to the number of synapses that a mouse has. And M4 is also not there yet. So we have a long, long way to go if we keep correlating number of synapses with the intelligence. What does it, okay, at the end of, what's in it for me, if you're asking? What we can learn from these models, all these experiments, all these very expensive experiments. What we can learn, there are two takeaways. Deeper models generalize better. And then second, no matter what you do, if task interference is a big problem, and scaling is not going to solve that problem. Here you see all these models, all the models that I showed you, when translating into X. This is coming from models, the multi-way models that we only evaluated translating into X. And this seems to be an open problem. There's interesting research questions here to be studied to get the gains as we are seeing here.
So what do you think was the difference between the two tests that's causing this effect?
So this is also, I should admit, this is also affected by the particular wiring that we're using. I mentioned we chose sharing everything, right? Sharing everything inherently amplifying the interference. If you're amplifying interference, then this problem is apparently too hard in a multitask setup to be solved. But here, since all the languages are translating into the same language, they're all benefiting from the amazing English language model, or the transfer properties from one language to the other.
Have you looked at all at like smaller groups of much more closely related languages on the X side and seen if the transfer works better in that scenario? Or?
Transfer works better in that scenario, yes. That whenever you actually drop number of languages in this bundle to 100 to 10, they're always better than what you get here. We actually shared that in the paper, in the wild paper. You can take a look at the details, but yes, yeah, that's you should be solving lesser tasks, the smaller number of tasks when you're translating into X, or you have to devise a different decoder wiring and decoder network to basically you should inject your inductive bias to wire your decoder differently to mitigate the negative transfer. So we summarized, I talked about, so this is the ground, this is the position paper that we put all this lists all the problems, what are the problems. This paper didn't mean to answer any of these problems, so we tried to answer the problems here in this paper, in the following papers, which I'll be talking about now. I'll go into the details of other papers right now. So massive networks, I mentioned about the systems aspect of the problem. By the way, this is the paper that I mentioned. This is how we implemented mixture of experts, sparse-ligated mixture of experts, and fused it into transformers. This was the earlier paper that I talked, how we wire our baselines. And this now I'm going to be talking about G-pipe, how we efficiently train these networks. So what you're seeing, this is the general trend. We also validated both on different tasks, image tasks or vision tasks, and also machine translation. As you scale, the average improvement is increasing. So here, number of parameters, average BLEU score, you see the improvement. So what are the systems that enable this? So now I'm going to be talking a little bit about the systems aspect of the things. So these models, very deep models, they're trained on 1024 TPU version 3 chips. By using G-pipe, they're also using bfloat 16, a different floating point operator. They're using rematerialization, or known as gradient checkpointing trick. We also scale the batch sizes to the limit by putting all these things together. As we add more and more chips, we observe sublinear scaling. So let's look how we implemented G-pipe. So this is a regular deep neural network. This is vanilla neural network. Nothing is nothing is pipelined, but you have 4 different devices, and you basically distribute your network into 4 different devices. If you train your model in a normal way, what you do is you do the forward pass, device 1, device 0, 1, 2, 3. You compute the loss, and then you backpropagate by going through all the devices, and then you compute the gradients, and then you do the update. But if you do some pipelining, you can also increase this. This looks like, by the way, if you put this into a time axis, it looks like this. So your first chip, first device is waiting all the way until here to get some signal, to do some work. So all this time here, this is called bubble. It's the time that you spend by not utilizing your device. And device utilization is huge because they're expensive. So you want to utilize, if you are allocated, if you're given if you're under specific allocation schedule, you should utilize your device. So we want to minimize the time that the devices are idle here. So what we can do, we just inspired by the instruction pipelining in operating systems. We applied the instruction pipelining at batch level. You can basically, let's look at here, we have 4 devices, and we split our input batches into micro batches. And as we process the micro batches, we are actually sending them to the next device, and then we decrease the bubble time here. And this is pretty much it. It's nothing fancy, but combined, it doesn't solve this bubble problem, which we also try to mitigate it by using gradient checkpointing, which means you can put multiple layers in a device. Say you have 10 layers, you put 10 layers in one device. And if you think about how you compute the gradients, you have to wait for the backpropagation deltas to come in. And up until that time, you have to basically wait. What we did is we only store, this is basically, I'm talking about gradient checkpointing trick. You only need to store the activations that are at the edge. You only store the last layer and the first layer activations. And then you recompute all the intermediate activations when they're needed. So it also saves a lot of memory. And it also decreases the bubble time by increasing the device utilization. Okay, what does it entail? Well, we here see some sublinear scaling. So let's ignore the GPU. This is not using NVLink. It's not high-speed interconnect. But here, let's look at the transformer on when we're using 32 micro batches. With eight-way split, it means we distribute our models on 8 devices. We're getting 8.6 speed up. That's what we meant by sublinear scaling. That was the systems aspect of things, but it enabled us to investigate and understand the deep neural network dynamics at scale. If you look at, so I talked about neural networks that are 1,000 layers deep. On the other end, if you go to, for example, NeurIPS, people analyze single-layer neural networks and their properties. So we have to find a common ground, middle ground, to analyze. But to motivate people that are more on the theory side, we also did some analysis. Okay, well, what these deep networks tell you, if you manage to analyze them at scale. We actually validated 2 things. Deep neural nets, there's an implicit acceleration as you go deeper. So these models converge way faster given the same number of examples. So they're more parameter efficient. This is what we show on the left. So you see you reach the same perplexity way faster than your shallower counterpart. It's very intriguing. It's also validating a couple of things. So maybe there's the over-parameterization is also introducing some implicit acceleration on top of your, say, momentum-based optimizers. The second thing is the effect of large batch sizes. It's particularly interesting for machine learning, machine translation researchers. If you have a large enough data set, there doesn't seem to be a limit in your batch size. But you should be careful. Here, for example, we stopped at 4 million, but as we tried, 8 million is also giving you improvements. We just didn't put that here. The problem here, as we increase our batch size to 4 million, 8 million, we're still seeing improvement, but there is some additional problems. For example, as you include more and more samples, that you increase the chance of hitting a bad example. So you should be more careful about your sample selection policy or data filtering policy. But it's interesting, our optimization subroutines or our optimizers seem to be doing good given this low variance gradient. So it was a very good observation that we validated. This is pretty much it in terms of the systems and analysis aspect. I'll talk about some byproducts or some additional papers. So you can also, we talked about how are we going to train these networks. Now let's talk about, okay, I'll give you this network, what's in it for me? We tried to plot the map of languages by using the intermediate representations of this network. So we have a data set of 3,000 sentences those 10 sentences are given on 103 languages. So they are basically n-way parallel, 103-way parallel test set. And what we did, we give all these sentences to the encoder, and then we picked up the encoder representations that are at the end. And by using some similarity analysis, in this case we used SVCCA, which gave us an affinity matrix. We partitioned the affinity matrix using a spectral clustering algorithm. And this is the clustering of all 103 languages. And then we asked our linguists, okay, what are the families? Can you draw some languages? And can you draw some circles? What we found, do they really look like language family? Do they recover the map of languages? And partially in 2 dimensions, we basically projected all the way down to 2 dimensions. there it seems to be the case. So at lunch we talked about Turkish and Finnish. If anyone can see Finnish here, I see Turkish is close to Azerbaijani. Chinese, I'm not sure if it is close, but definitely close to Uzbek and Kazakh.
Hungarian is in there, right?
Japanese is close to Turkish.
Finnish is Uralic, which is
The Chinese Turkic language, yes.
Okay.
Japanese is right
No,
in the
no,
middle of
okay.
that purple.
It's pretty good, actually.
yeah. Hungarian and Finnish is in the same place.
Although it's weird to have Dravidian embedded inside of Indo-Aryan, but still.
That might be an artifact of two-dimensional projection.
Or borrowings. There's a lot of history that's shared between the languages. That's aerial, not family. Definitely. Yeah.
But the interesting thing, so I don't have much of a NLP background. So to me it was, okay, how do we know it's happening in the finer granularity? So we looked at some token embeddings, and so I'm not super clear about how did we plot these, by the way. I'm sure about the next one though. So, but the takeaway here is, as you go more finer grained, they also resemble the tree of languages apparently. But I was curious about one thing. So these are highly influenced by the word embeddings. At the end of the day, we use word embeddings, and they apply heuristics like SPM, sentence piece model, or word piece model, or byte pair encoding. What happens if we take two semantically similar languages that we know they're coming from the same family, but they're given in different scripts? So we actually have such languages. For example, I think Turkish and one other language is such two languages. And so these two, Serbian and Croatian, I'm not sure.
Sorry, Serbian and Croatian.
Yeah. So those two languages, actually, a lot of languages here that you see at the encoder embedding, they come close together at the upper layer, the topmost layer of the encoder. So this was a very good indicator for us that's telling us, okay, these encoders, this massively multilingual encoders, can map, actually they're mapping based on some semantics. And if you have a semantic encoder, you can use it for so many other things, which I'm going to be talking next. So if your encoder is good at encoding semantics, then you should be able to do some good cross-lingual downstream transfer as a byproduct. So what we did, we trained all these models. What's in it for the other tasks, like part of speech, or XNLI, like natural language understanding, document classification, part of speech, not from named entity recognition, but so, and we compared it against multilingual BERT. They're not even very comparable in terms of number of parameters, but the interesting thing here was we were seeing improvements on the different variety of tasks. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but this came as a byproduct of just training a multilingual NMT model and then just reusing its encoder out of the box.
Do you think this is surprisingly bad, I think, for the multilingual trained system on Barrel data compared to BERT, which is trained on just monolingual content?
It's surprising for?
Bad for the models trained using machine translation data.
Is it bad?
I think multilingual BERT is not multilingual, it's just trained on multilingual language model.
Yeah.
I find it hard to understand why multilingual BERT is working actually. Harder than the Barrel data.
Is it bad? Is it good? I mean, if you think about what is the utility of it, you don't have to. And you can be more practical. Okay, I'll just train a 1,000 language model rather than training a multilingual BERT model on 1,000 languages, and I'll use it to translate across all these 1,000 languages and also do all these tasks together.
Yeah, I don't mean bad by for this. I mean it is less encouraging to train a multilingual translation model for those tasks rather than MBERT model. So I find it a little bit frustrating that MBERT model is doing that good.
Multilingual. So we just these models can also do translation, by the way.
Yeah.
Right?
Much stronger, right?
It's
Than
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to do translation with BERT. So these models are just trained for translation, and then we just fine-tuned one layer to do these tasks. So I don't know.
I think Hani's argument is that you have way more semantic information in the multilingual translation model than in the BERT model, and he would expect it to do better.
Oh,
I think this is what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Express is stronger actually to train on parallel data.
Okay.
Because you have the strong signal from the other language, which you don't have in BERT by just no occurrence.
Good question. Yeah, cross-lingual downstream transfer is one thing, but we're more interested in cross-lingual transfer in translation, like zero shot. So that wasn't our focus. That was more like, okay, what's in it for other tasks? Yeah. And what we also observed, translating to English from all languages implicitly forces the representation to be in the same space. And also, as you fine-tune, high-resource language quality doesn't change. So they are really hard to move from their converged point. All right, so we talked a lot about scaled models, giant models. But if you have only limited amount of capacity, how are you going to use it? Let's talk a little bit about its practical aspect. And say you train this giant model, and then you have new data. Are you gonna train it again? Are you gonna fine tune? But if you're gonna fine tune, then you have to store this giant network again. Even the storage is a big problem of these networks. So we came up with a very simple adaptation technique inspired by residual adapters. Our goal is, so this actually also connects with the language level mixture of experts. This is basically implementing a hard language level mixture of experts. What we are doing here, you take a pre-trained M4 model and you add some language specific layers. These are what we call adapter layers. And you just sprinkle it right after these feed-forward layers of the entire network. And then you route the examples by looking at their language ID. And then the adapter layer is looking like this. It's very simple. It normalizes, so allows you to plug in and play anywhere. And it also has two projection layers with some nonlinearity. If you don't have enough data, you make it like a down projection. It make it a bottleneck network. But if you have a lot of data, you actually expand the hidden dimension here to make the most out of your data. So it's actually allowing you to adapt to new domains and also new domains or additional data on a particular language. And by doing so, we added a 400 million transform M4 model, these residual adapters, and on left you're seeing English to any. This is when you're translating it to X or any, and by giving these language-specific adapters, you're actually recovering all the recovering the high-resource regression. But also, it's not affecting the transfer capability because you're not touching anything on the original network. You're only fine-tuning this adapter networks with the new data. And also, you see the similar trend on the on any to English tasks, half of the other tasks. You're seeing huge improvements on high-resource languages. You can still play with and without any regression on the lower source languages. So it's really making it practical. And if you actually add more and more data, more capacity, you can, by adding 13% extra capacity, that was the point that we reached the bilingual baselines. So 200 translation models, 400 million parameter each versus 400 million plus 13%. It's actually getting as good as the army of translation models. And also you can increase the adapter size to get more gains, so you can actually cram more and more layers in each adapters and then train as you get more data, or you can make this hierarchical adaptation scheme to adapt both language and domain at the same time. So that's where we summarized everything here. Enhancing zero shot. This was also another primer paper that we put. It's basically these models are, as you increase the multilinguality, these models are getting better and better in zero-shot translation because it's adding some implicit regularization. It has to actually align things together, but you can also encourage it even further by adding some alignment loss on top of encoder representation. It's very simple and very practical, and it scales to hundreds of languages. I'm not going to go into detail of it. I want to talk a little bit about the training problem and the hyperparameters. How are we actually doing the hyperparameter search in given that joint models? Let's first talk about the task scheduling. So I talked earlier. I talked about we were using some temperature-based data sampling strategy to balance the learning process on different low resource and high resource languages. This experiment and the following experiment, they're not implemented at scale. They're scaled down and tested on WMT data, so they're not actually 103 languages. But this is an attempt to improve the translation quality when you're translating from English to X. So we picked up English German and English French. We separated out the decoders for these two languages. After sharing a couple of layers in the decoder, we separated them out. And we gave the model, if you're familiar with WMT, English, French, English, German setup, one hand you have 4 million samples, on the other hand you have 40 million sentence examples. So there's an imbalance between the training examples. So if you just mix everything together, even the data sampling strategy, it's not going to help that much. Or you have to devise something else. But we thought, okay, why are we learning how to weight different tasks in an outer loop as an outer loop optimization? And we also used our baseline knowledge. Here it's in the loss function. I don't want to go into detail, but it gives you a weight at the end. At every update, you're updating, and after doing the parameter update, you're also doing an additional update in the outer loop, and it is giving you a weight for each task by using. So this is the learned task weights from the beginning of the training. Here, green is French, blue is German. So it's learning for example, here they upweight the French task and then downweight the German task because apparently German was too easy to learn because you don't have enough data. You're basically downweighting your German examples and upweighting the French example. To reach we're also giving the baseline scores. We are telling, okay, for German, beat 28 blue score or beat this perplexity. And for French, beat 40 blue score or beat this perplexity, which are given here. These are the baselines that we give to the model. And this outer loop optimization by reading a couple of things. Okay, what is the delta blue? What is the gain that I'm getting doing the previous update? By integrating these observations into a loss function and doing an outer loop optimization, you get some weights, which are here, and then you either apply it on top of you apply to change your gradients or your learning rates. We chose to change the learning rates themselves. Here you see two learning rates for different language pairs. It's basically adding some noise on top of what you have as a transformer learning rate schedule, but it was still dominated by the transformer learning rate schedule, which was hand-tuned. So it was trying to change the learning rate itself. So it was changing the learning rate, but the magnitude of change was not big enough to change the structure of the learning rate. So which is dominated by our hand-tuned learning rates here. So what we did, okay, why are we also not learning the learning rate itself? So that's what we do by using a technique from 90s. It's a very simple technique, and it's scalable. You take the derivative of your loss function with respect to your learning rate, and you end up with a very simple and intuitive formula, which is here. Okay, let's just look here. That tells us if you are agreeing with your previous update direction with your current gradient. So if your current gradient update direction is agreeing with your previous update, just increase your learning rate. It's very intuitive. And if you're not agreeing with your previous update direction, just decrease the learning rate. It's the closed form, and you can actually, again, implement it as an outer loop optimization. These are all what meta-learning or learning to learn framework can enable. And by doing so, these are the learning rates that we learned. These are, in the previous slides, the underlying form was not learned, but here, these learning rate schedules are learned. So that was very interesting for us. And there, if you have budget, if you fine-tuned your baseline, bilingual baseline, like crazy, so they are on par, but not better than your very well-tuned single language pair baselines. But if you go to multitask setup, they were actually way better than our baselines. And we also tested it on BERT, and they were also on par with hand-tuned BERT, learning rate schedule, etc.
So this learning rate is starting from scratch, it's learning everything the same as the inverse square.
Yes, yes.
Eventually it will be the...
So we set it to zero. Some number very close to zero, e to the minus 8 or 9, something like that. And it learns to increase the learning rate first, and then it starts decreasing. Interestingly, so this looks like a inverse square root scaling. It actually recovers that. It redraws that what we hand tuned for transformer. But interestingly, it also goes below zero sometimes. So this means it's deciding to do gradient ascent. And we thought, okay, this is counterintuitive. We shouldn't do that. And if you don't do that, it just didn't work. So it means that so this is also a very sharp drop. So we also tried to slow it down, as in this case here, it's not that, and it's not that fast. So it's not actually going below zero. But even in this case, quality was pretty much the same. So it's telling us something about the lost surface, area surface of these networks. So you're really, the place that you are, you can actually take a step back and then come back to the same regime. Go back and then come back to the same regime.
If you prevent it from going to the below zero, it didn't work.
It didn't work, yes.
In this approach, like we fine-tuned each learning rate for each parameters?
We tried a few different things, but what seems to be working, you just use it, for example, softmax, you bundle softmax and embeddings together and then learn a single learning rate for those two. And then entire encoder body, transformer body can use a single learning rate. And you'll be surprised what that looks like, that learned learning rate looks like. And same goes for the encoder. You can learn basically 3 different learning rates for the entire network. Okay. So this is pretty much the end of my talk. I'll finish with some open problems, what the future entails, what we see as promising directions. So this cross-lingual downstream transfer, it's still interesting, and there is a lot of interest. Now, BERT, for example, became a power horse of like so many NLP tasks, right? But what is it? What's enabling BERT to do that? It's still unknown. And it's also interesting to see just training a multilingual model or machine translation model. You can also recycle the encoder or even decoder of these models on downstream tasks. I think there's something going on that we should understand. We should investigate more. So probably we should revisit our like objective functions, just like you said. Maybe the semantics that we're injecting is pretty good. So what does that tell to the other tasks, and what we can learn from other tasks, then inject it into our objectives? That's interesting. And also, the new tasks, are these like document classification? Is it really the task that these models should be used or not? And are those the languages? For example, if you look at the overlap in terms of the number of languages, XLMR, multilingual BERT, this M4, there, if you add all of them up, it adds up to 180 languages actually. So they're not also overlapping. So we're trying to extend it. Okay, let's just add these 2 more languages and then make the analysis more fair, because maybe this Wikipedia adding something, or edit data from Common Crawl is adding something. So we're also trying to make it a more fair comparison. On the unsupervised machine translation, so I said in the second slide, so we are going to universal translation. And as we take more steps, we will see less informative data, or the data that has less structure in terms of bilingual data, for example. It's aligned, right? Or trilingual data, or 100-way aligned data. We're moving into the regimes, we only have, say, monolingual data. Or even one step further, we don't even have any written form data. You only have audio now. or you have to go and find the data in a different form, or your data is gonna be coming from different contextual form, right? So these are more in the unsupervised MT and also multi-domain or so multimodal translation phase. And we believe this knowledge base of huge machine translation model is a good starting point to jumpstart any unsupervised MT direction. That's basically what's here, adapting to unseen languages and basically jumpstarting the unsupervised MT. Also, there's a huge opportunity if you want to study transfer learning. Transfer learning is, let's make a crude partition. We can split into two. There's parallel transfer, which I talked almost only about parallel transfer, where you learn tasks simultaneously and you expect transfer happening in parallel. But this is not the only way of doing transfer. Even in the parallel transfer case, you can devise smarter schedules, learning rate schedules, which I showed in the last two slides, to mitigate interference and so on. So there's actually an opening to more core machine learning concepts and meta learning and so on. And the second one is the serial transfer. You can also learn incrementally, right? Okay, I'm going to first learn 10 languages and I'm going to add 5 more languages without forgetting what I have learned. So this is a continual learning setup or lifelong learning setup. This is also another way to go. It's not, and I haven't presented, the only thing that I presented here was residual adapters, where you learn a base model and then extend it into new domains or more data. But there's also some promising directions in the serial transfer case by using continual learning, meta learning, basically maximizing without forgetting. So that's pretty much it. Thanks a lot. It was a long run. Thank you.
So we still have 8 minutes or so. So if you have any questions, so please use the time.
If you can still speak French. If you still have some voice.
There are a lot of questions.
So for the scheduler problem, did you try that on the multilingual system or that was multitask?
That was a multilingual multitask system.
The system is French, German to English.
System is English to French and German.
And when you say here in the formula, the best model coming from bilingual model?
This baseline is coming from a bilingual model. Yes. Yeah. This what was it? This SJ or S bar, it's coming from here basically, this dark line. It's the baseline that we ask the scheduler, okay, this is where you should beat, you should surpass. Yeah.
And is that tried as well on the massive multilingual system?
We haven't scaled it to that level.
Why not?
We were busy with other papers.
But should work, right?
Should work. We hit. So honestly, why we didn't try? That was the particular way that we implemented our framework. It wasn't allowing us to do a lot of sharing and not sharing. These experiments are done on GPU, and there's a difference in terms of implementation between GPU and TPU. So we haven't actually ported this one to TPU. Yeah.
For the learning rate learning, have you experimented with different depth models?
Different?
The different sizes, different numbers of layers. Because it seems to me that deeper models are quite sensitive to your learning rate choice. So is this solving the problem for you? Can you just go now to 60, 120 layers and not have to fine-tune the learning rate anymore?
No.
It's not solving it.
It's solving the learning rate problem. It's not solving. So deep models, if you are able to train a 64-layer model by using your heuristics, then you can also swap your learning rate schedule heuristic with this. But if you scale your model, okay, let me be more specific. This is not the first wall that you will hit if you try to make your model deep. In the GPy paper, we talk about it. It's not like window you just stretch. As you make your models deeper, you will have a lot of non-finite elements, and the source of those non-finite elements can be coming from a learning rate, very large learning rate, but most of them are either overconfident in their predictions, which blows up, say, logits or other things, or you don't have the gradients that you can distribute to the lower layers of your network. So there we use two things. We are basically applying some logit clipping. This is a heuristic. And we are also using, say, transparent attention, for example. We are learning how to distribute gradients to the layers down below. So if you are able to train, if you're fairly confident, if you're at this stage, you have all these heuristics, tricks, and then you can replace your learning rate schedule with this. The benefit here is when you're training a 100 billion parameter network, you only have a few shots. You can only train these you cannot do a grid search, you cannot do anything, and you will only be training one or two such systems, right? Given the budget, given the time. And we are not able to tune those hyperparameters, but these are actually kind of suboptimal. If you apply it on, for example, on single pair, language pair baseline, these are suboptimal. But since we cannot tune the models at scale, they're also suboptimal. So it's actually these type of meta-learning techniques, they excel at scale.
And did you find different curves for different layers, or encoder versus decoder, or they all follow the same?
For encoder, decoder, so we coupled decoder softmax, decoder embedding, and encoder embedding. Those three are coupled together. They all move with the same pace. And we tried so many different things to change the, say, transformer encoder block, use separate learning rate for each layer, use separate learning rate for per parameter, etc. It seems like they don't matter much. You can just use a single learning rate for the whole encoder if you separate out word embeddings.
Were you surprised it came out with the same inverse square like now?
This one,
Yes.
This was actually, I was reading this paper, I saw this kind of curve, and this paper, they applied it on CIFAR 10. It's an image classification problem, and I saw this curve, they learned something like this. I said, okay, and let's replicate. Then we replicated, we saw the same thing.
It's very similar to an ohm.
Yes. There's actually a theory why it should be inverse square root, or why you should decay learning rate, so on. Starting from a very small learning rate, basically this warm-up phase, it's indicating our lack of understanding on initialization, and it's also using very, very large batches. Yeah. There are some other techniques that allow you to not start from very zero. It allows you to get rid of the warm-up hyperparameter. But we haven't used it.
For the cross-lingual transfer learning, did you also look at low-resource languages or distant languages from English? Because this is for French.
I think so. I didn't read this too much in detail. So we're comparing against always multilingual BERT. And here again, right-hand side is the low resource languages. It's actually worse than multilingual BERT on XNLI, but it's better better than multilingual BERT on low resource languages, and it's the same for part of speech. This might be this may hint something else. Multilingual BERT is not using that smart learning rate schedules, or it's not using task weighting. It's not using. We studied that a lot, so we try to maximize transfer to low resource. So I think it's kind of expected.
We have results that show the opposite actually.
Sorry?
We have some results show the opposite to that, so it helps on the large scale languages, but we didn't scale up to the small scale language. So that's another data point. Like
True.
10 language, very large scale, which is definitely better than English.
True.
But 100 language or Intra? I don't know. It's different.
I haven't tried. I don't know. Yeah.
Anything else? You're now on time, I think. So let's thank for the speakers.
Thank you.